Ever look around you and think, this doesn't make any sense? Why is it like this? What if instead it worked this way? In this podcast, with support from the Democratizing Innovation Institute and the Social Impact Lab at BlockU, we explore what it takes for everyday people to reimagine the world around us and what stands in our way. Are the heroes that you loved as a kid, could have been in a TV show or a book or a story, the same as the people who still serve as heroes for you now? First of all, who were the heroes that spoke to you as a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old? Can you remember?
As a 6-year-old, I think it was like Laura Ingalls and always having the cool thing happening that she could work her way out of, or the hard thing happening she could work her way out of, and then I don't think there's a better hero than Buffy. I think she still might be my hero.
Yeah,
I
feel
love
like
the hard thing happening that she could work her way out
Yeah.
of.
Definitely. Yeah.
And does that apply to Little House on the Prairie and Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Absolutely.
That's who we're talking about?
Absolutely. And I was going to add Anne of Green Gables, who was like one of my heroes when I was a
Yeah.
kid. Like just the whole vibe of like the orphan and the family that adopted her. And she had the guy dipping her pigtails in the ink. And like there's the rom-com and the adventure. It was like 12 stories in one.
Yeah.
It was kind of charming. I still want to go to see, where she quote unquote lived in Prince Edward Island. It's like on my bucket list. So maybe someday.
There's a field that sometimes I go on hikes to that has a tree with a tree swing underneath it that I always think of Anne of Green Gables for some reason in that field, that it just reminds me of what I imagine her environment to be.
So this is amazing, right? A real place, as I'm understanding it, and yet it evokes what Anne means and meant to you, which I think is a non-trivial thing. I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit that as a very small boy, so I was TV limited until the point, as some listeners of What Have Been Said know, when the cord to the television was cut with a pair of pinking shears, which I can talk about. It's a moment which I consider the best thing my mother ever did.
Okay.
But we can get there. But in early days, I was a Mighty Mouse fan as a little kid. And like so weird.
He had a lot of power.
A really muscular mouse.
Yeah.
What?
He had a lot of power.
A lot of power. And I liked, my father sang opera at that age. And I think I liked that he was very operatic about his heroism. I mean, this is when I was a very tiny boy. Right. And then later, I still liked I loved your point about the hard things happening. I loved the heroes. I loved Peter Parker, Spider-Man, because he never had it all sewn up. The same thing I think that you're talking about with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But my more recent heroes are even more like that. Like, this is going to sound stupid, but I love the character Moss in the IT Crowd, like Richard Ayoade's character. Do you know? So it's a book about IT. It's a TV show, a comedy about IT characters in like a British corporation. And Ayoade's character and Chris O'Dowd's character and Catherine Parkinson's character, they're terrible, right? They're bumbling. They do nothing right. But there's something I love. In fact, my favorite books now are the Jonathan Fairfax books, which are about a bumbling hero. So it's gone from operatic superpowered mouse to bumbling people who somehow make themselves relevant.
So what about the way that they bumble appeals to you in that way?
Well, I think real life, we bumble a lot.
It's true.
Maybe I'm saying more about myself than anyone else. But like, so many things, they don't work. And yet we're trying to come through, right? We're trying to, if not always to be heroes, we're often on that journey of trying to come through in a world where we make mistakes all the time, right? And so I think I've come to love the hero who can be hapless.
Yeah.
Right. What were you
Yeah,
gonna
it's so
say,
funny you
man?
say this because I spent a lot of time with my grandmother's older sister when I was growing up, and she was obsessed with mysteries, and we would watch Columbo. And so it got me into mysteries and puzzles.
Yeah.
But to your point, he always solved it, but he looked hapless. He looked like a fool. So I was like, I have one more question. I just have one more question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like he's nerding out. Like
Yeah.
he's got that other question, and that's
Yeah.
what makes him great.
Yeah.
But unlike all the slicksters that, like we've seen them looking like they're big shots and
Right.
having nothing. So I'd rather someone who is hapless in style but had one more question, as you put it.
Well, and like you
That
never
is-
knew with Columbo, you never knew, like you always thought like his question was a non sequitur. It had nothing to do with anything. And yet it was like the key to the case. Like,
Yes, yeah, and that's almost the best
yeah.
part, right? I think of it as the Holden Caulfield principle, the idea that it's in the digression that we find out what we're really saying,
Yeah.
right? I think the fact that like that's the real part is that where we find the good stuff isn't in the big bombastic question that we'd planned. It's in the one we didn't expect that seemed off track.
Totally.
I love what you just said.
This is actually a great segue to introducing our guest who has maybe one of the most amazing what if insteads we've ever had on the show. So I'm really delighted that we have with us today Sage Brody. She is a master somatic movement therapy educator with a master's in pastoral counseling, and she's an education director and lead faculty for the Levin Institute for Expressive Movement. So thank you for joining us today.
I'm really happy to be here.
I'm Alejandro Juarez Crawford. My co-host is Mim Plavin Masterman. And we're on a mission to make experiments of your own feel as normal as watching videos on your phone, if that still seems normal to you. Welcome to What If Instead.
So as I set up, Sage has one of the most amazing what if insteads. And I was hoping you could talk us through your origin story of where you were before becoming a somatic movement therapist and how you got to where you are today.
Okay. So for me, I guess my origin story really starts, I have to give a little bit of a way back origin in the way that my parents got divorced when I was really young, like 6 months old. And so my mom, and in her struggle, had this very intense fear that I wouldn't be able to support myself in the way that she wouldn't be able to support. She wasn't able to support herself. So it was like her whole mission was, how do I get Sage to a place where she doesn't have to depend on anyone? And at some point in our court journey, a psychiatrist told her that I was really smart and that meant I needed to test to go to this school that started at nursery school, but that you had to be really smart to get into. And I got in, and we moved to Manhattan to in fact have me go there, because at that point we didn't even live in Manhattan. And then that school kind of bred this way that I was supposed to be in the world like a master of the universe, one of the leaders of society. And I guess I can out you guys at this point that we all went to this high school together.
Oh no, this is a bunch of test takers. But wait, I actually love what you're doing here, which is that, we think of the anointed person,
Yeah.
right? The golden child, the chosen one, the person who is supposed to be in that track.
Right.
Right. And what I loved thinking of our hapless heroes and happenstance heroes was that it wasn't like your mother was like, you are the one who's gonna rule the world. It was more like, well, someone told her that you were super smart, and so she made this leap. I actually, in ways I can tell you later, identify with that story. Like, in fact, you first, and then I'll tell you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I did well in lots of things in school, but she heard from this is really ridiculous when I tell you that I had a really bad physics teacher who was so bad that I needed a tutor.
The high school kid in me has got to know who it was. No, don't say.
It was Mr. Tomes.
What? I don't know.
His name was Mr. Tomes. And I fell asleep every single day in physics. I needed a tutor to like get through it. But that tutor was like a grad student from Columbia who told my mom that since I was really good at math and science, I should be applying to colleges as an engineer. And forget the fact that I also had other talents and was really good at other stuff, but this was going to be my ticket to get into schools. So I went to college for civil and environmental engineering. And when I wanted to change to history, was told, no, if you change to history, I'm going to pull you out of school and send you to a public university. Because
wow,
because in her mind, history graduates become secretaries. And this was like the level of pressure to accomplish and do what I was going to do. Do what she, thought I had to do.
There's a fascinating theme in this, which in some sense it's in tension with what we've said so far, which is that should you do the thing that you're good at or the thing that you love, right? And especially at a young age, you might be just good at math and science, so you've got to be an engineer.
Right.
But is that where your passion is? I'll never forget being at the college fair with a fellow student from this high school. And the parents were all about pre-med. They had a million questions, I think, I forget, one of the Ivy League schools about pre-med. And I remember whispering to this mutual classmate of ours, Sage, and saying, you want to be a doctor? And I remember my friend saying, who became quite distinguished in the arts.
Yeah.
In what he did. And so I think you're onto something which it's actually fascinating. I, similarly to you, if I can just share, like, would never have gone to that school. In fact, my parents didn't know about this test, right?
Yeah.
And we were just, my parents are musicians, right? And yet suddenly all my friends started saying they were taking this test. And one of them had an older brother at that school. And I was afraid that I was going to lose all my friends because they were all going to go to the school. So I took this test. And then I was the only one of them
who got in.
That for whatever reason, but like, it's the same thing as like, it was completely being almost like, oh, you should try this thing. And that was sort of positive for me.
Yeah.
But the other side of what you brought out is when it's like, oh, you should be this, it can be powerful when it's the myth of like, there are great expectations of you, son, right? But it can also be dangerous. Can you build on that? We want to hear about where that took you.
Yeah. So where it took me was I did very well in school, and I thought, okay, so I'll be a professor. And I got into doctoral programs. I was a woman doing engineering, wanting to be a professor. And then I freaked out my senior year of college and was like, what are you doing? Grad students in engineering grad schools work like 20 hours a day for $10,000 a year. Like, why would you do this? If you're going to do this, why wouldn't you be a banker? And so I graduated. I had accepted a fellowship. And then was like, I don't want to go. And my mother, in her infinite wisdom, said, if you don't have a job by August, I'm throwing you in a car and we are going to school. And so I was like, okay, that means I'm getting a job. And that means like there is no dilly-dallying here.
Quite the motivator, yeah.
Yeah, and we could say, at 20, I guess I was 21, about to be 22. I didn't know that I could have free agency at all to say, no, you can't do that. And I got a job at a very prestigious investment bank in a training program where they were all like, well, why don't you have a job yet? And I was like, because I didn't look for one. When I left that and I was doing special projects still for the same firm, I then became, the kind of lead person for when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. How much money did they owe us the moment they went bankrupt to support a $7 billion lawsuit? And so I was, in the absolute epicenter of all of it, presenting to the CEO every morning at 7 a.m., describing where I was in the analysis and what more information I needed, and working with the lawyers and working with all these different groups. And I was completely burnt out. I was working till like 1:00 in the morning, going home, sleeping for 4 hours, and then back. And that was, I think it was 6 months with 1 day off. And the day I took off, the CEO called me. It was the only time he ever called me, but he called me on that day off. So, and it was, of course, I didn't have my computer and he had questions. It was like, okay, you got to just be there. And I actually, in the weirdness of all of it, got a horrible review that year because my direct manager honestly didn't like that his manager and his manager's manager really valued me. And one of my mentors just said, what do you want? Where do you want to be in 2 years? Like take the holidays and really think about where you want to be in 2 years. And the only answer I had was not here. Like I had accomplished everything I had wanted to accomplish in this career already, and it was like, wait, I didn't even intend for this career. This was nothing I wanted. And here I am. I was like 36, managing director, just kept rising, but like didn't really want this.
Which is fascinating because you had the answers when people say, what do you do?
Yeah.
Or when I think many of us who've been in a track like that, it's great to be able to tell that story. They're two separate questions. One is, so what do you do? And you get to tell this amazing story, which makes you back to where we started, the protagonist, the hero in an exciting adventure. The other is, where do you want to be?
Well,
and you're like, anywhere but here.
Anywhere but here. And I realized I was spiritually dying. My body was, I was physically dying. I had to take anxiety medication to go to work every day. Like, this is not the way we're supposed to be living. And I went into my boss's office and I said, I want to leave. I want to leave. And this is the date I want to leave on. I want to leave on June 9th. I'm winding down a group that I'd inherited from a merger. That's the day it's over. That's the day I'm gone. And he's like, well, no, just take a leave of absence now. I was like, no, I want to do this. And then I'm actually leaving. Before I left, I had signed up to do a workshop at Kripalu. I'd never been there before, at Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health. And I said, okay, I'm going to get like a not great room. I'm going to like start seeing, can I live in this different way? Not all the super luxury I was in, not all of that. And went to that and was really moved by my experience there. And I started even volunteering there as like a local volunteer because my place I was living was only about 45 minutes away. I took like an 8-week course at Rhode Island School of Design that summer to say, do I want to go back to architecture school? I was an engineer. I always loved architecture. I was like, nope, I do not want to go back to that. So I sat on my couch. I watched Days of Our Lives for a while. I started working at an organic farm nearby, and I realized I could still be a workaholic working at a farm. As a volunteer, workaholic. I ended up taking this class at Kripalu. It was a workshop. It was their oldest personal growth workshop, like the longest standing personal growth workshop. And Kripalu has been around since the 70s. So this was something that had been around for like 30 years, called the Inner Quest. And coming out of it, I had a kind of statement inside of me, I need to dance more. And one of the participants who was a volunteer who lived at Kripalu said, well, Sage, I heard you're staying in X-ray. Come with me to the dance class. And I was like, okay. And I went and I got in touch with this creative part of me that had been kind of dormant for 20 years. That there was such a power in what happened in that class and in the way I was in my body, the way I was able to express different emotions, the way I was able to feel creative and open and free.
Sage, can you paint a
Yeah.
scene or a moment when you were getting in touch? Like, what was that like? In almost like a story or a picture.
Yeah, well, actually, as you say that, it's really I remember certain things that the teacher said, and the teacher is someone who now I work incredibly closely with, 15 years later, Dan Levin, who runs the Levin Institute, the founder. And it was kind of 3/4 of the way through the class where you're like, you've been led in different ways of moving, feeling different expressions of yourself. And he said to paint a picture with your fingers as part of the movement. And I remember this moment. It was probably like 30 people, and it's in this room that's like very long and has columns in it, and kind of feeling like I was moving along a wall and painting that picture and coming alive. The two ironies were that when I had left the company, I had negotiated a package. Like I couldn't do anything for them for a year. And like 3 months before, 2 months before that, there's like, okay, well, the year is up and we'd like for you to come back. How much would you want to get paid an hour? And I gave them an astronomical rate that I would like just thought they'd never pay. Right. So this is the idea that they want me to help with the lawsuit, because that's what they wanted to hire me back for, just as a consultant, was something I really didn't want to do. So I gave them this astronomical rate. The day I came back from that workshop, I got a call from the legal department saying, okay, we're going to pay it and we're going to start in 2 weeks. And I'm like, okay. And so how am I going to support myself to do this? As a local volunteer, I was able to go to that dance class every day. And so I said, okay, in my head, I will work from 8 to 11, and then I will drive the 45 minutes to take this class every day. So it was my self-care and how to balance this piece of regulating myself while I was dipping my toe back into this world I really didn't want to be in anymore.
What I find really interesting about this is that you're basically like, okay, if I'm going to do this thing and support myself because I know I need to,
Right.
I also have to do this thing for me that I find really important and meaningful.
Yes.
And so I guess I want to pick up on that thread of how did it develop from something important and meaningful for you to do for yourself to now something you want to do for other people, and how you want them to learn how to do it for other people? Like when was that flip, and like what was that like for you?
Well, it started with I started to take a life coach training, and the word somatic kept coming up in the life coach training. I had no idea what it meant. But I knew that I saw in the Kripalu catalog that Dan Levin, who I had danced with and was dancing with multiple times a week now, was leading this training called Somasoul Somatic. At that point, it was Somasoul Somatic Expressive Therapy Training. And I was like, well, here's where I might be able to learn about this word. What does the life coach mean when she says somatics, right? And not as an intention to take it as a training, but I just want to experience this because it was the way it was structured at that point. You could dip in and out just and take workshops. And I went and I found deep meaning and healing in the way that he was inviting us into feeling our emotions, into supporting our emotions, to being in our body. Because this wasn't a dance workshop. This was a somatic movement therapy workshop. I just had only known him as a dance teacher before then. still, I was like, oh, well, maybe it's something I'd want to keep going in because I'd met some really great people in this workshop and the work spoke to me, but I'll still be a life coach and just sprinkle this in. And then I got called to be deposed in this
Oh my God.
$7 billion lawsuit where I freaked out. I was in kind of PTSD, feeling like I was going to be persecuted and maybe thrown in jail for not having done anything wrong, but just being around the financial crisis, and started working privately with Dan, and realized that what he was able to offer me, the support I got as I was in that place of post-traumatic stress, and that was getting touched, the implicit memories that were getting touched of that kind of persecution, were something that life coaching couldn't touch. And I needed to change that focus from life coaching to being a somatic movement therapist.
You've been describing these experiences of getting locked into something, at least as I listen to it, from the moment that initially it was family saying you have to do this, to later they were kind of making these offers that you could refuse. I mean, it was like you gave them the you'll never pay this, and now they're going to pay this, and so I'm thinking a lot as I listen about what locks us in, what gives us the capacity to question that lock in, right? Which I hear you going through in different ways, though in the earliest experiences it sounds like you weren't questioning it. And then what allows you to get free? And when you use this phrase, which life coaching couldn't touch at the end, I got really curious to ask you, what was it that it couldn't touch? And what allowed you out of that lock-in?
So when I told the life coach what I was going through, the life coach trainer, she was like, well, just change your perspective. And I'm like, I'm literally having panic attacks. And
just look at it from another angle.
Right. So what it couldn't touch was, well, our body, and this is well documented and understood as part of trauma responses and trauma therapy now, is that our body holds our implicit memories, right? So when we go through trauma, that trauma is stored in our body unless we get the kind of care and resolution for it at the time. So if when traumatic things had happened early in my life, my mother, instead of pressuring me into doing things and pressuring and telling me I shouldn't feel a certain way or whatever, would have met me in those feelings, would have helped me to resolve them. Then when things happen now, it wouldn't be touching this wound that's in me, right? Where there's a real threat that feels incredibly real, and it can be outsized for the situation that's happening now, that the reaction that we have is not in congruence with the size of the threat now. Implicit memory, and the way that the work I do helps to recognize how implicit memory lives in our nervous system, lives in our body, and through working with our feelings, being able to support our feelings and take in support for our feelings that we didn't have way back when the original trauma happened. It actually can change the physiology. It can change the nervous system responses. That's what can create the way to break out of our patterns.
Can I ask one question on this? So is the idea behind it, and if I oversimplify, please correct me, is the idea behind it that you're taking the reaction from an unconscious reaction to a conscious place that's like take a breath and pause before having the reaction?
Well, that's part of it.
Okay.
So we work with something that Dan calls the ABCs of somatic processing. And awareness is the first A, right? To be aware of what I'm feeling. So much of the time, we're not aware of what we're feeling as we are in the society where we live in our head. We are aware of a situation, we're aware of the outside situation, but we're not aware of what we feel.
If in a second as you go, you can move us toward the people you serve, what they may not be aware of, what they may be locked into, where the threat may be outsized, everything you said, what it is that a listener to this might take away for themselves.
Well, really, it's all of our feelings. I was working with a client earlier today who was talking about how she's scared to post something on social media. Or actually, the statement she made was just, I don't know, I go there and I'm just overwhelmed. Right. I go there.
It's right next to the deposition door is the post on social media. I don't want to go through that one either.
Right. But so when you say, I don't want to go through that door, whether it's a deposition or social media, there's a word you're not using. I'm scared.
Yeah.
There's something happening in me that I'm afraid. And so it's, I might be afraid of rejection. I might be afraid of humiliation. I might be afraid of,
definitely afraid of deposition.
Well, so here, if I'm afraid of deposition, I'm afraid of being interrogated. I'm afraid of somehow being, for me, it was literally, I was afraid of being thrown in jail. That's something I said was going to, even though I was on the good guy side, who the heck knew? It's very odd. Like, think about your conversations with your friends, with your family, that you're talking about, oh, this happened and that happened, and this person was being a mean, and that person got really angry, and this really scary thing is happening on the news, but we're not really getting in touch with what's my feeling. What's my feeling? What am I aware of? How can I acknowledge that? And then how can I befriend? How can I be with and befriend our feelings?
You said almost befriending our feelings. It's not about the external thing, the situation we're in. This, it sounds like, is kind of a what if instead for you. What if instead of assuming that the things making me crazy are a situation I'm in, what if I befriended the feelings? Like, you had me going through avoiding the social media door with fear, maybe justified fear, but whatever. You want me to get in touch with that feeling. And you made this statement about emotions, even difficult ones, having deep wisdom that can guide us. Can you expand on this piece, befriending your emotion?
Sure.
And what's the instead that someone might take away?
Well, we all have this, we all have the instinct inside of us to move away from pain. The reason we have that instinct to move away from pain is because way back when that pain wasn't supported. If our caregivers had been able to be with us in our places of pain and to not make our fear, our sadness, our feeling humiliated wrong, right? Didn't mess with us and say, oh, you shouldn't be scared. Oh, don't be sad. Oh, or, my mom was famous for strategizing me out of my feelings, right? So you felt like you were dumped by your friends. Okay, let's strategize how you're going to have somebody to eat lunch with, right? Instead of, let's deal with your sadness. Let's deal with the devastation. And our feelings can't give us the wisdom if we don't do that for ourselves now. If a kid comes home from school crying, right? And you say, why are you crying? Right? You just want them to tell you, they're going to shut down more. If instead you invite that kid to come sit with you and put your arm around them and say, it's okay, you're crying, and I'm here. I'm being with you. And when you feel ready to talk, I'm listening. That's that piece of befriending. And sometimes it starts with tolerating, not befriending, because we're so used to not tolerating these feelings. But when I say these feelings, that's an embodied way of being in our body and our feelings. All emotions start with some kind of physical sensation.
I think about how at work, people are like, don't bring your whole self to work, right? You're supposed to just show up and do your work and emotions don't matter. But things happen at work that are upsetting.
Yeah.
You fail at a project, or you don't get the promotion, or you do get the promotion, but then it comes at a cost of some other, right? But then there's a cost to us for suppressing that and for doing all of that. I'm just a person with no emotions. I'm not a robot.
Right.
I mean, how many people are busy destroying countries right now because they didn't allow, these old men didn't allow themselves. They had to be the most brilliant entrepreneur, or they had to be, the unbeatable intelligence agent.
They're not open to that feeling of defeat, that feeling of failure, that feeling of fear that they would have to make room for if they gave up the fight. If we aren't open to our wounds and feeling our wounds, we act out. We act out in ways that can be really detrimental to our relationships, to society, when we aren't open to feeling these pains. And sometimes it's just in the defensive, arguing is a way that we get away from our wounds. Fighting is a way we get away from our wounds. They're what we call in the kind of one of the frameworks we use, the layers of human experience. It's what we call an impasse behavior.
Your thing about strategizing your way out of a problem, I relate so strongly to that. Like it's always been my tendency when confronted with a problem to strategize out, and I've been very rewarded for that, right? As someone who made his living doing strategy for people, right? The strategy is fine, but to go back to where you started us, Sage, if we're not in touch with, if we're not alive, if we're not in touch with everything you've described going on with us, then we're missing the guidance. Isn't that the word you've used? We're missing something that could guide us also. It's not just about oh, now I feel better.
Right.
If I'm understanding you.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I was about to get to. So thank you for bringing me back to it, is that these more difficult emotions, like our rage, like our fear, like our grief, have wisdom in them that we're not going to get to if we don't let ourselves feel these feelings and kind of let them exist and ferment and build that relationship inside of ourselves that our body, not our brain, but that our body can speak to us. Talk about grounded rage, which is very different from the rage we imagine in the world. Grounded rage isn't hurting anyone. Grounded rage is just a live emotion of, this is wrong. I have a no to something that's going on. It's not an acting out. It's very in yourself. You're not angry at someone. I'm just feeling my anger. The other really important feeling is need. Need is another life-giving emotion that can, it is a quote unquote 4-letter word, but we can live it like a 4-letter word. Need can give us a compass for where to go in life, right? I needed to get out of banking and needed to find what was going to speak to me that I wanted to follow in my life. Fear points us to something maybe that maybe isn't the right path for us. Anger points us to what we want to have a protest to. And grief points us to, okay, if this was meaningful, maybe there are other things that I want to continue to cultivate. Are you guys up for an experiment here as we're together? Okay.
Let's do this.
This is what we're all about.
Okay. So we could even just go back to those two situations. Each of you could go back into that situation where you were yesterday trying to figure out something and strategize, and after hearing about the passing of your colleague. And if you can, consider stepping right back into the experience of, I'm here and I'm struggling with this problem, or I really get that news. And as you do that, just notice what happens in your body. As you notice it, just notice if it's a comfortable or an uncomfortable feeling. I just want to hear a little bit, what do you notice?
my leg is all tense. Like my calf muscle is so tense. I might get a Charlie horse right now. I feel like I'm very cold. Like I'm shivering right now. Yeah, those are the two big things I notice.
So as you notice that, and I'll talk to you, and then I'll talk to you, Alejandro. Mem, just notice it, and let's just let them be here. Okay. Ask into the shivering, that experience, that sensation of shivering. What brings it here?
I think it's just a feeling of loss. Yeah.
So just notice that it's the truth is I lost something that had meaning for me. And it doesn't have a lot of story attached to it, but there's this feeling of loss. Just notice how it feels to name it, and that we're here together. Are you open for another question?
Yeah, sure. Let's do this. Yeah.
Ask into the shivering what it might need. What it might need to feel a little better.
I think just remembering what a great colleague and person my colleague was. Yeah. I think that would make it better.
And so as that may be happening, just notice what happens to the shivering.
It's definitely subsided.
Yeah. So that was, and if I come over to you, Alejandro, what did you notice in your body? Or if you can, reconnect to it. I don't know if you got pulled away as you were watching what was happening with Min. But if you can, what do you notice?
So it's a fork in the road question that I was weighing.
Yeah.
A really big one. And the feeling, the physical sensation at one fork is weight lifted.
Weight lifted?
Like off your shoulders, like taking off a heavy backpack. Sense of, right? The feeling in the other fork is excitement about something that could have a lot of possibility. It's almost like it could, it's more that sense of having a platform. Like I'm trying to make this like physical, but like one is take off the weight.
Yeah.
The other is get on the platform. It's kind of the movement feelings
if we pull back just one step, what does it feel like to be at the fork?
To be at the fork. That's nicely done.
Where I haven't made a decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's more of a like, twisted up in your stomach feeling of portent, right? And
yeah. So, when we're at a fork or having to make a decision point, it can be really easy to just try and go back and forth. But there's what you're saying about being in that twisted place is a really important piece of acknowledging the feeling of, it sounds like confusion and honestly, maybe even torture of how I could, perseverate around which to do. So that's the way that we can get stuck, and that's the churning. That's that little piece of torture I was talking about, right? If I actually go down one road, I'm afraid of losing the other option. The emotions can guide the path. The emotions also may not just be about today. And that's that back, if we go back to, we all have implicit memories. We all have wounds that we carry. If the message that comes out feels very much like an old message or an old feeling, then we might start to be able to pull apart what's getting in our way that's about our past versus what's about the current situation that's just touching these old places.
Yeah, that's really good. Like there's a very trivial example for me. I have a lot of packing anxiety. Right? And like going to trip and packing the bags. And I know exactly it's because when I was a child, whatever, there was a lot of chaos around packing for trips. And so there, the guidance is not avoid this trip because you're anxious about packing, right? It's hardly the takeaway. It's more recognize, maybe the guidance for me is recognize that when I was that comes from somewhere.
Yes.
I don't know where to take that, except that
and that's where
maybe that can allow me a little distance. What were you going to say?
In this work, there might be some need to not only, acknowledge it, but also start to work with that kid who kind of things happened where maybe he didn't bring something he was supposed to take or something like that, right? That then something went wrong, right? Or then he didn't have the right whatever, and something. So how do we then tend to the way those kids still live in us? Because they do. That's part of what's happening at those times.
Yeah.
And that's the work that I do, with individual clients. That's the work that I do with our training programs, and both teaching teachers how to teach dance, but also teaching people how to just be with themselves in the ways that we were talking. And we also use the expressive arts to do that with drawing and moving, but and then also train students to do that with others as somatic movement therapists.
Sage, I particularly appreciate the way we just did a live experiment. It was a bit vulnerable, but if we're going to be what if instead, then we got to go there. And the instead that you've presented here really doesn't just make me think, it makes me think about those emotions and how they might guide.
Exactly.
So, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. It's been a pleasure being with you guys.
It's just amazing. I
feel like I want to talk for 3 more hours, but I can't.
I know. We'll go find a restaurant that's almost going to close, and we'll sit there until they kick us out.
Really good to talk to you both.
It's great to talk with you. Camera pans out. You see that the restaurant where we all are has closed long ago.
People are packing
waiters
up
are
and
standing comfortable.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you,
You're
Sage.
very welcome.
You've been listening to What If Instead. For more episodes, go to whatifinstead.net. Thanks for joining us.